Thank you. Well, film, whether for cinema, for TV or for small personal screens, is probably the most popular cultural activity, not just in Ireland, but I think on the planet. And in that sense, having a screen or a film industry in Ireland is extremely important in terms of the country's capacity to respond in cultural terms to the modern world and to modern life. And I think almost every European country and most countries in the world seek to have a film industry. Now, the context of this bill is raising the maximum of the aggregate amount of investment loans, grants or monies provided from 300 to 500 million. And I think that's something that is broadly welcome. But what I do think is lacking in terms of the Department Minister is any sense of what current policy is, other than in a very narrow commercial sense. And I just want to use the opportunity now to essentially ask you, you're in the job now quite a while, so to ask you, have you come to any views as the Minister for the Department in terms of how it should be developed? Because I do think we need to move on from the model that Michael D. Higgins established in the 1990s and which has been enormously successful, and we need to move on and forward in terms of the of how things are developing at the moment. And really, there hasn't been that much information from the department other than programmes which I think, frankly, the people who are taxpayers find very difficult to follow and understand. For instance, I think this bill perhaps and the Irish Film Board, which went out of existence quite a long time ago, I don't see why this bill doesn't actually reference Screen Ireland, because Screen Ireland is inclusive of how, if you like, the broader industry is nowadays, because obviously people if you like, consume the product in a whole variety of ways other than in what you might call traditional film, as shown in traditional cinemas. What I would like to know, first of all, is in terms of structures of Screen Ireland, why not have a project board which actually addresses in a formal way the issues around training, because that's where it starts, including apprenticeships and recognised apprenticeships in the film industry. So I want to ask the Minister whether or not her department has put forward any proposals which are being sought at the moment in relation to new apprenticeships, so that the many young people who are interested in working broadly in screen, film and audiovisual, that they have an opportunity and a structured way in which to seek to develop a career in the industry. And I secondly want to ask the Minister, would she be prepared to implement this structure either directly in relation to this Act, or would she be prepared to implement this in the form of ministerial regulations? Because, you know, the difficulty, as we all appreciate, with film is that clearly it's project-based, and you move from project to project, and therein lies, if you like, the problem, particularly for people starting off in the industry, as to how they get training and education and experience that's appropriate, how they do that in a constructive way that's constructive for the future of film in Ireland, but is also constructive for them as individuals and people. And it should certainly be a union, a trade union-based business and industry in Ireland, because if we don't have a structure the problem that we risk is that people in the industry, particularly in the early stages and in certain elements of the industry, will end up being in very precarious employment, whereas some of the people at the top of the industry will end up being in very lucrative employment, most frequently as self-employed people on contracts of limited duration for the length of the project. So I think we need to think about that, and I think we need to reflect that, and the Minister needs to reflect that, so when people come in with an objective of securing the tax reliefs and the tax breaks, that there is actually a structure available to them where they are made aware of what's necessary to do it properly and to treat people properly. We had a disturbing reported film on prime time recently. We also, I think all of us have been approached both by people who are on the production side and people who are working in the industry about concerns that they have about terms and conditions of employment. There's also an issue in Ireland, and for the Minister as well, which we haven't heard about yet, about regional supports and about how the industry, if you like, is placed around the country. I mean, some supports, for instance, are not necessarily available in the Cork area. Has the Minister given any consideration to that, and can she tell us what the problem is there? And then there are other parts of the country who might like to develop film, and it's a bit opaque as to how they might go about doing that. We have also the development currently of private studios around the country. Does the Minister, with Ardmore, with the state having disposed of and agreed to the disposal of Ardmore, what's the Minister's view from a policy point of view of how the state should continue to be involved? Is the state just the awarder of grants and tax breaks, or is the state going to have a more central role in terms of the industry? I know in Fine Gael there is an ethos of privatisation of everything and minimum regulation of everything, but I actually think that in this particular case we need to hear from the Minister what's her take in terms of regulation, what's her take in terms of the involvement and the expression of the involvement and interest of the public in the area, given that the public, through the tax code, ends up being ultimately a significant contributor. Other issues, Minister, that people have raised with me, and again I know the industry itself has done a lot of work on this. What's the situation in relation to children who are on set, and how are they protected in terms of their working on set? And I know guidelines have been produced for films, but again I think the department, given its role, needs to be a leader in relation to this. And again, I don't know if the Minister has seen or been consulted or consulted herself in relation to how children, what guidelines there are for children on set, and whether or not, again, they may need to be encoded in a form of regulation to actually provide for appropriate and maximum protection for underage minors on sets, and how that should be approached. I also want to ask about another feature of the industry which has received a lot of attention in recent times, and that is the gender pay gap. I think we're all familiar with the fact that there have been disclosure worldwide that the gender pay gap in the film industry including in the areas like Hollywood that we would most associate with the film industry on an international scale, but also in companies like the BBC in the United Kingdom, which are heavily involved in film, and also recent disclosures in RTE around gender pay parity. Does the Minister have a policy on that? Should we actually have a code that's either reflected in ministerial regulation or reflected indeed in the Act itself? I want to hear from the Minister what her policies are in relation to this, and to actually, as I say, in particular, all of this fits into the broad ambit of the employment policy and conditions and protections that exist in terms of the industry. I'm also conscious of the fact that right around the country now, there are a lot of courses as part of overall media, film and arts and culture courses that involve film in both further education and in third-level college and university education. Now, what we have is a situation where, because of the project-based nature of the industry, it is very hard for people to get a start. People who come from families who may already be in the industry, they have a head start because they know where they're going, but other people can find it extremely difficult to get a foothold. And this is really important if we want to build up a sustainable cadre of people in Ireland who can express their creativity and their talents in the industry, that we have a pathway to people being able to become involved in the industry, where they have spent a significant amount of time training or working for degrees and postgraduate degrees in the industry. And again, we know worldwide the same issues arise. So again, I want to know from the Minister, what is her policy in relation to educational courses and training courses for the industry? Some are private, some are public. I hear suggestions from time to time that maybe there are too many courses and there isn't enough employment available for all of the people who are doing courses. What's the Minister and the Department's view in relation to this? Finally, I want to also say to the Minister, I've raised with her on many occasions the issue of Lugalaw, the home of the late Garrick de Brún, who did so much for culture, music, film and the arts in Ireland, and where that estate, the 5,000 acres in the Wicklow Mountains, has been the scene of quite many famous films and famous occasions. I and other deputies have asked the Minister to consider acquiring this on behalf of the state. Now, I realise and I do appreciate, Minister, this is almost exclusively a Fine Gael government. So Fine Gael is adverse to public ownership of additional new assets coming into the public ownership. And your current small amount of coalition partners don't seem particularly interested in being involved in this at all. So again, can I just ask you, Lugalaw, the areas nearby, they are very famous in Irish film history. Have you in any way advanced your examination and consideration of the state taking Lugalaw, and particularly the land, into private ownership? Because I think all of us are concerned that in recent months, basically private property signs have gone up on the approach to an area that has been free to people in Ireland, and as I say, is so associated with films and filmmaking in Ireland. So, Minister, I didn't actually get a copy of your script. Do you have a copy of the script available for us? Because I would like to know, and I think it's important as Minister, you actually fill us in on the details of policy as you have considered it and developed it since you came into the department.